I shouldn't have opened the door wearing just that slip. But I didn't plan it. Not consciously. It was one of those muggy June evenings where the air felt like it had hands. I'd just stepped out of a lukewarm shower, still damp, my skin soft and humming. And then the knock. One of those slow, familiar knocks that already knows the answer. It was Nate. My husband's best friend. The one he trusted with everything. The one he made laugh the loudest. The one he always said was like a brother to him. He stood there in his faded t-shirt and worn jeans, a six-pack in one hand, the other resting casually on the doorframe like he belonged there. His eyes flicked down my body just once and then locked with mine like nothing had happened. But it had. "Hey," he said, with that same crooked grin. "He told me to check in on you. Make sure you weren't too lonely while he was away." The way he said it. I felt it in the base of my spine. That slight pause before lonely, the way his voice dipped, deeper than it needed to be. "That was sweet of him," I said, stepping aside to let him in. I didn't bother fixing the strap that had slipped halfway down my shoulder. His eyes noticed, but he didn't comment. He didn't need to. The air between us was thick. Not just from the weather. Something else. Something unsaid. Something old. I went to the kitchen, pretending not to notice his gaze trailing after me. "You want something cold?" "Sure," he said. Surprised me. When I turned back, he was already leaning against the counter, closer than before. Close enough to smell the faintest trace of whatever soap he used. Something earthy. Masculine. Familiar. I handed him a drink, our fingers brushing. Just that. But it felt like more. Too much. Not enough. "So," he said, voice low, "how are you holding up without him?" I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Trying not to climb the walls. He held my gaze. "And how's that going?" Something in me tightened. And I knew right then this wasn't just a visit. This was a match, striking itself against everything I tried to keep dry. He was here to look after me. But that wasn't what either of us really wanted. Not even close. Nate stayed longer than necessary. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. The silences were loaded, weighted with glances that lingered a second too long, gestures that meant more than they should have. I offered him dinner. He said yes. I lit a candle I normally wouldn't. He noticed. His eyes followed the curve of my neck every time I leaned over the table. I felt the way his presence charged the air. It wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't. The way he looked at me like he remembered things I'd never told him. After dinner, he offered to help clean up. We moved around each other in the kitchen like dancers afraid to touch. When he reached past me to grab a plate, his hand brushed the small of my back. I exhaled sharply. I think he heard it. He leaned in a little closer. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Am I?" He looked at me then, really looked. His face was so close I could feel the warmth from his skin. I thought he might kiss me. I wanted him to. But instead, he pulled back. Slowly. Torturously. "I should go," he said, voice thick. I nodded. "Okay." But neither of us moved. And then, just as he reached the door, he turned. "Do you want me to come by tomorrow?" I should have said no. "Yeah," I whispered. "If you're not busy." He smiled. And left. I locked the door behind him, my fingers trembling. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It had just begun. The next day felt longer than it should have. Every sound made me look toward the door. Every car engine made my pulse stutter. I cleaned the living room twice, rearranged pillows that didn't need rearranging, and kept checking the mirror like it might answer something. When Nate finally knocked, it wasn't just a sound, it was a current. My stomach flipped, my hands damp. I opened the door slower this time. Deliberate. He noticed. This time, I wore something different. Casual but not careless. Fitted. Comfortable enough to deny intent, flattering enough to betray it. He stepped in without asking. We didn't mention last night. But it hovered there. Every glance, every pause between words, it was still here, thick in the corners of the room. He brought a movie, something we'd all watched together before. Familiarity, safety, maybe to pretend this was harmless. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the movie flickering between us like a buffer. But the space didn't stay empty for long. First, it was the way his knee brushed mine when he shifted. Then it was the way I laughed at something I didn't find funny just to fill the quiet. Then, our eyes met. And held. The movie kept playing, but we weren't watching anymore. I felt the air shift when he moved closer, just an inch. But enough. My breath caught. He noticed. "Tell me to stop," he said softly. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because in that moment, every lonely night, every glance I'd buried, every what if I'd silenced, came roaring back like a tide that no longer cared about rules. And I think I moved first. Just barely. But enough. That kiss didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces, his breath touching mine, his hand hovering at my waist, the silence stretching like a held breath between us. And then, like gravity had finally won, our mouths found each other. It wasn't soft. Not really. It was too full of restraint that had snapped. Months, maybe years of things unsaid. It was slow only because we were savoring the mistake even as we made it. His hands slid over my sides like he was learning me by touch. My body moved without thinking, my back arching, my fingers finding the curve of his shoulder, the heat of his neck. I could feel his heartbeat. It was loud. Or maybe that was mine. He pulled away just enough to look at me. "This is wrong," he said, his voice barely more than breath. I nodded, throat tight. "I know." But neither of us moved. And then his forehead pressed against mine, and we stood there, breathing together like it was the only thing we could still do right. His hands were at my hips. Mine slid up under his shirt, fingers brushing skin that made me dizzy. "Tell me you want this too," he said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I kissed him again, instead harder this time. And that was the moment we stopped pretending. We didn't go to my bedroom. We stayed in the living room, surrounded by the soft flicker of the forgotten TV and the quiet hush of a house that had no idea what it was witnessing. Our bodies moved like they had been waiting for this, aching, cautious, desperate. Every breath was a confession. I remembered the way Nate looked at me in that moment, like he was seeing me for the first time, and also like he'd been seeing me this way forever. His touch was reverent, almost too gentle, as if afraid I might break. But I wasn't fragile. I was fire. At some point, we ended up on the floor, tangled in each other, skin against skin where clothes had once been. It was the kind of closeness that didn't ask questions. That didn't apologize. That just existed, raw and necessary. His mouth found the curve of my neck, slow and searching. My fingers gripped the edge of the couch cushion like it might anchor me, but I was already drifting. Floating somewhere warm and wild. Time blurred. I don't remember how long we stayed like that, wrapped in silence and heat in each other. But when it ended, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the start of something I didn't know how to name. Nate lay beside me on the rug, his hands still tangled in mine. Our breathing was the only sound. Steady, uneven, shared. "We shouldn't have," I said into the quiet. He didn't answer right away. Then, but we did. I turned to look at him. "What does that mean?" He met my eyes. "It means I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen." "Are you?" I didn't know. I didn't want to. The room felt different after that. The air wasn't heavy anymore. It was charged with something new, uncertainty maybe. Or the thrill of no longer hiding. He kissed my shoulder. Just once. Just enough to make me shiver again. And then, without saying anything more, he stayed. The morning after was quiet. Not awkward, just quiet. Like we were both trying to keep the memory intact by not naming it too loudly. He made coffee. I watched him move around my kitchen like he belonged there, and part of me wanted to freeze that moment and live in it. But reality was waiting. I had texts from my husband. Sweet, trusting ones. Updates from his trip, pictures of the hotel view, a reminder to water the plants. I replied with shaky fingers, my chest tight. Guilt didn't come all at once. It arrived in whispers. In glances. In silence. Nate didn't ask how I felt. Maybe he didn't need to. Or maybe he already knew. He touched my wrist before he left. A simple gesture. But it lingered. "We crossed a line," I whispered. He nodded. "We did. And now?" His eyes held mine. "Now we figure out if we stay there. Or if we go back." But I already knew. Because the next time he came over, it wasn't accidental. We didn't stumble. We walked into it. It wasn't just lust. It was comfort. Hunger. Need. And something more dangerous, something that felt like belonging. We stopped pretending we could go back. The visits continued. Not every day. Just enough to make my heart race each time I heard a knock. We were living in a bubble built from lies, yes, but also from warmth, from laughter, from a kind of honesty that came only in stolen hours. And yet, every moment with him made going back to normal life harder. Because I was starting to wonder if what we had wasn't a mistake, but a truth we'd been too scared to see before. The day my husband came home, the air felt different. I stood at the door rehearsing smiles. Practicing normal. I wore a dress I knew he liked, cooked the meal he always asked for when he returned from trips. I tried to feel like myself. The version of me he knew. But the mirror wouldn't cooperate. When he walked in, he kissed me like nothing had changed. And maybe for him, nothing had. Nate didn't text. Didn't call. We both knew this was the moment everything would be tested. That night, lying beside my husband, his arm heavy across my waist, I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of choices I hadn't fully made. The warmth beside me should have been comfort. But it felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. The next day I saw Nate. He didn't say anything. Just looked at me across the grocery store aisle, eyes dark with everything we couldn't say. And I felt my whole body react to him, like a whisper only I could hear. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen after my husband had gone to bed. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the memory of another laugh, another touch, another truth. I picked up my phone, typed 3 words, then deleted them, then typed them again. I still feel it. I hit send. And I didn't sleep at all. Because once you touch something real, pretending becomes impossible.